So, do you play any games?
Of course, like I grew up in World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft. So, World of Warcraft, like that was a big game. Now, if you think about...
They introduced achievements at some point, and everyone was after those, so it was a really big thing, gathering all those trophies and points, so yeah.
Achievements in World of Warcraft, the amount of effort and money and time and development time that goes into building something like World of Warcraft, it's not a trivial thing. That is an expensive thing. The second thing is the achievements to you. You're playing something for fun. They're giving you some structure. You're achieving something. You get something for that achievement.
Hi everyone, welcome to this podcast. Today we are going to delve into AI-powered applications at the enterprise. We aim to interview experts in areas of immersive learning, gamification, or even decision-making analysis, and help sort of businesses to maximize their impact, learning from experts via their applications in the past. To explore this today, we have Dr. Ashwin Mehta from Methodology today, who has been an expert with 13 years of experience in the field of gamification. We are going to talk about that topic today. I knew Ash for a while, so it's going to be great to have him here and join him for this podcast. So Ash, welcome. Thanks for coming today. It's so great to have you here. As I said in the beginning, like I never imagined I would do a podcast as an engineer and a computer scientist, but we are here, and I'm excited to talk to you about several topics today. So
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. So we met quite a few years ago, I believe, and this whole avatar technology and AI, like I would say, was in its beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Like how have you felt throughout these last few years? Like given that you're at the pinnacle of the application layer of this technology and your background, this could also be a great way to sort of introduce sort of your career so far to the audience. Sure. and your insights.
Absolutely.
Yeah, keen to hear about that perspective.
So it's interesting that you mentioned when we met, because when we met, a lot of the generative AI revolution that is happening at the moment, that was sparked by this launch of ChatGPT, effectively a large language model with a web interface that made it quite usable. That revolution hadn't happened when we met. So we were talking about kind of different things. And if we go back around maybe 4 or 5 years, so we have obviously the issue of the pandemic and remote working and all of these things. But at that time, when we were talking about AI, and you and I were talking about AI, but also when I was talking about AI in terms of things like learning strategy or enterprise strategy, we were very much talking about machine learning. We were talking about neural networks. We were potentially talking about things like NLP, but we weren't talking about large language models.
It's more restricted, right?
Yeah, so there was a barrier to entry. So yes, as you've just said, you have a background as an engineer, and mostly at that time, it was restricted to people who had some kind of computer science or coding background. Most of the folks were not able to use it. And if I pivot ever so slightly to my background, so I started in chemistry, and I was working in the lab doing organic chemistry, which is a wet kind of science field. And I moved from there through a number of business disciplines and consulting, eventually to become interested in digital learning. And my entry point into that was that I was doing a project. I was working for a company that had sort of multinational operations. And I was doing a project in the Gambia, which was, it's West Africa, it's still in West Africa. But at the time, it wasn't a place that had stable power and broadband networks. It wasn't a place that was flush with computer labs that everybody could use. So there was this kind of inequality of access. And I was doing, I was looking at a field research site which was doing malaria research. And I went to this place, and it was on the river front, so it was within the floodplain of the river, and it had flood defenses around it. And one of the issues we were looking at was that when it's the rainy season, the place would flood. And that means that for 8 weeks every year, you would have a pause in what the research is doing. And one of the exercises that I was going through with the teams there was, well, is that a problem? Because if you pause your work for 8 weeks, for some projects, that's absolutely fine. You can pause it and there's no impact. But for other projects, it's catastrophic to have to do that. So we were looking at like a dark site, something that's outside the floodplain. How do you know, what buildings do you need? Do we need freezers? Do we need labs? Do we need solar panels? Stability of power and all of this stuff. And I was looking at that from a point of view of, if this disrupts the business, this could have an impact on the business. And while I was there, I came across this other problem. And the other problem was that all of these projects depended on people. Those people needed to be recruited, needed to be trained, needed to be onboarded, needed to have skills, needed to have knowledge. And those people were the community-facing workforce. So they would be going into communities and explaining good health and hygiene practices, but also explaining what the research projects were and trying to recruit those participants. And that led me into this field of digital learning, because we were thinking, well, we have these people that we recruit, and they're vitally important, not only to the community, but also to the business. How do we make sure they have the skills and the knowledge that they need? And the dependency at the time was, well, we bring them into a classroom and train them for 20 weeks with 15 trainers that we have. But upon scrutiny, I asked the question, where are these trainers? It's like, well, we had 15, but people move on in their careers. Some people leave the organization. Some people move from this part of the organization to this other part.
Then you have to train the trainer.
You have to train them as well. But now we have a cohort of 3 trainers who somehow still need to maintain the onboarding of all of these workers. And my question at the time was, can we do this digitally? And at the time, the answer was, we don't really know, because the broadband stability isn't there. We don't have the computers. We don't have the internet, Wi-Fi connectivity or cable connectivity. We haven't got the constructs. We don't have the content. We don't have the systems. We don't have accessibility. We maybe don't even have devices. So my initial project was, well, can we just do all of that stuff end to end, build it from scratch?
And what was the outcome? Like, did you get there in the end?
We did it. So we did it over a couple of years, actually. And not only did we do it over a couple of years, and there was impact, etc., but also the country itself had initiatives, because they were also upgrading their broadband. They were also upgrading their power networks. So over time, I was in that country off and on for about something like between 5 and 7 years. And over time, it went from when you go out to a restaurant or a bar in the evening and you have no connectivity, to you go out to a restaurant or a bar in the evening and people are watching the football on their iPads because they have connectivity and there's TV going in the background, and they're WhatsApping each other to communicate the scores, and somebody's just scored, everybody celebrates. So that was only a period of maybe 5 years. Now the reason I mention that is that obviously it's a little bit of my origin story, how I got into this, but also it's a demonstration of how society moves with technology very quickly if there is a need to do so. Because that entire country really embraced technology in a very short span of time. And that's not just the Gambia, that's also true of most African countries, have gone through a very rapid trajectory of implementing technology. And a lot of them are mobile first as well. That's very interesting, but that led me into this idea of, well, how do we know what the drivers of intention are when people are interacting with technology? Because people are driven to adopt technologies in different ways. And there is a whole body of research out there, and I got really interested in that. So I ended up researching that for a few years. And that led me down this path of statistical modeling and things like that. Gave me data sets, which I could later play with and think about machine learning and, test it out and apply it to that kind of data. And that led me into this artificial intelligence piece, eventually, from that machine learning point.
It's such a rapid trajectory, because not only learning became digital in the recent years, but also more and more personalized. So I assume the impact on that community with the personalization aspect, I would say it's even larger, right?
Potentially. So, I left that company, and I'm no longer working in that community. But my last touch point with that community was around just after the time of Ebola.
Mm.
And one of the things we were able to do was rapidly get the information out because we'd already built the infrastructure and the constructs. But your point on personalization, I think, is a tricky one, because I have spoken about this a couple of times in the past, that you remember the Cambridge Analytica Facebook kind of scandal, however many years ago that was. That was, to some degree, that was almost not a test case, but it was a really good example of the ability to personalize if you have sufficient data. And when we talk about personalization in the learning space, I think we talk about personalization as almost a marketing term. We need to have sufficient personal data if we're going to be able to personalize at scale, particularly.
There was no data beforehand. I mean, it was very hard to gather it in that context, at least. So I assume it also takes time to be built out. So it's not a one switch thing, you know.
Yeah, but the level of data that we have in organizations at the moment is on people, personal data. We might know things like their employee number. We might know which department they sit in. We might know their job description. We might know who their manager is.
But not their interest in detail, right?
Yes.
Because that's more restricted. That's not accessible.
Absolutely. So their interests, their behaviors, the way that they talk, the things that they question, their value sets, their attitudes towards certain things. We don't know anything about this.
And this brings me to our topic today, which is, I would say, gamification. Like, I know that you have a really extensive background in the topic. There's a lot of like theory around gamification. What I'm seeing is so many companies, so many experts believe in its effects, but not that many keep implementing it and trying it, or even succeed in deploying it. Like, do you think that it's related to the complexities around not just the data aspects, but also this kind of evolution that we are going through in the digitized learning, or how do you see the effects of gamification already as of today in comparison to the time you mentioned? Like, how has it evolved based on your opinion?
So let's split out the term for a second, because gamification is a process. The outcome might be game-based learning. It might be serious games. It might be ever so slightly gamified e-learning. But the outputs and the outcomes that we want with it, so we want outcomes to be slightly better, cognitive, behavioral, and motivational outcomes. But gamification itself, particularly in learning, is an application of the consideration of game-based elements into the process of learning design itself. So we need to be, let's talk about all of those things ever so slightly differently.
Exactly.
Right? So what's the potential? Now, the potential with the potential before AI and the potential after AI. And let's say, how do we quantify this? So before AI, let's go before November 2022, when everybody had access, easy access to things that we could call AI. So I will make that very blanket statement, because we've had machine learning and all of these things for decades now. So before and after, how easy is it to do this stuff, and what's the efficacy? There is, if anybody wants to go and read this, I think the latest and greatest meta-analysis, it was Saylor and Homner, which was 2020. And a meta-analysis, for anybody who's not fully familiar with that, is a synthesis of the research. So when you go and do a study, you'll do an empirical study, you'll have a cohort, you might test some effects, you might have a model, you might gather some data, you might have some results, discussion, conclusions, etc. And then you have lots of those studies. And the idea with each study is you say, well, we want everything to be generalizable. We want to be able to take away some key findings. But sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. Now, a meta-analysis or a systematic review, they are slightly different things. But that's where you would take all of these studies that have been done on lots of different cohorts and lots of different populations and lots of different mechanisms of testing, and synthesize all of that data into one set of findings. So that it's quite a good paper to go and read. And we can think about various things when it comes to game-based learning or gamification, the process of gamification. But the kinds of things that they were finding were that is there an efficacy benefit when we think about cognitive, behavioral, or motivational outcomes? And broadly, yes, there is. It's not huge. It is statistically significant, which means it's not due to chance, but it is a small to medium effect. So if we translate that into percentages, can we get better cognitive outcomes? Maybe by something in the order of 15 to 20%. Can we get better motivational outcomes or behavioral outcomes? Maybe in the order of 10 to 15%. So that's great as a finding, but then we need to dig deeper and figure out what that means. And there is a taxonomy by Toda et al. I think it's 2019. That's very useful in this space because for two reasons. One, it's very explanatory, and the other is there is a graphic. You can just look at it. It's a circle, and they split it out, and it's very well presented. And something being well presented makes it, easier and more palatable for people to understand. And they were talking about a taxonomy of game mechanics that you can integrate into the process of gamification. So we could be looking at narrative structure and storytelling, game-based fiction, for example. Now, when we look at the meta-analysis and the evidence, game-based fiction does help to predict some of the aspects of the outcomes that we want. So these two things go hand in hand. And of course, I won't go deep dive into both papers because the papers are out there and people can read those papers. But if we have a taxonomy, we can think about what we can apply. And that's irrespective of artificial intelligence. This is just, you could do this with a pen and a napkin in a bar or in a pub. Just think through the things that you want to apply. So narrative structure and storytelling, that we want to be thinking about game-based economics, that we want to be thinking about social participation, for example. What about progression levels, proficiency levels? So we have all of these different things that we can think about, and each of these is a mechanism or a mechanic.
Which of these are the most impactful based on your experience? Like if someone was to start today implementing these methodologies or was looking into these, like what would be your order of priorities in terms of impact or yeah?
So there are two orders of priority. One is, if we think about the consulting term, the low-hanging fruit, right?
Yes.
What's the easiest thing to implement? The easiest thing to implement nearly always, and this is why people do it, is points, trophies, badges. Because platforms in learning, in enterprise learning, we have content, infrastructure, data. The content sits on a platform. People interact with the content on a platform that produces some interaction data. That's roughly all of enterprise learning. But the platforms, they usually have some kind of gamification mechanic, which is, can you assign trophies or badges to people?
And do you see the psychological impact on the learners that they really want to gather these trophies, these points? Like, is it like a default behavior in all cultures, countries? Have you seen that happening?
So there is, if we think about motivational theory and self-determination theory for a second, people want to have autonomy. People want to, so autonomy, mastery, purpose is Dan Pink's way of putting it. I think Bandura is the previous researcher who was looking at this, but we have this concept that autonomy, people want to have autonomy over their work. They want to have the freedom to choose what they do. People want mastery, so I want to be the best at what I do. And on purpose, the thing that I do should have some meaning behind it. There's no point in being the best at something if what you are the best at is meaningless. Apply that kind of thing to what we're talking about in terms of enterprise learning and gamification. Some of the mechanisms around trophies and badges are effectively meaningless because how they are implemented are meaningless. So is it any good for me to be the person who got the trophy for doing the most e-learning courses? It's kind of meaningless, right? It doesn't incentivize me to in any way, unless you're going to tie some kind of reward mechanism to this and say, right, the person who did the most e-learning courses in my company is going to get £1,000 at the end of the year. You might get people who would do it for that kind of motivation, but fundamentally it doesn't mean anything. If we tie it to things like proficiency, so the people who are the most skilled and can produce the most output in a company, then maybe it means something more. But that's a company level consideration to make. You know, what do you incentivize? People themselves are incentivized by things like autonomy. So if we start to build in things like narrative structure and storytelling for the purposes of engagement, and we give people some autonomy in terms of what they choose to do. So we're not talking about mandated courses now. We're talking about higher level experiences. And the analogy is mobile games. So do you play any games?
Of course, like I grew up in World of Warcraft.
World of Warcraft. So World of Warcraft, right? That was a big game. Now, if you think about
They introduced achievements at some point, and everyone was after those, you know. So it was a really, really big thing, you know, gathering all those trophies and points. So yeah.
So the achievements in World of Warcraft, let's think about two things. So the first thing is the amount of effort and money and time and development time that goes into building something like World of Warcraft. It's not a trivial thing. That is an expensive thing. Servers everywhere, you know,
Yeah,
trophies, right? But the second thing is the achievements to you. You're playing something for fun. They're giving you some structure. You're achieving something. You get something for that achievement. Probably you get some points. Maybe you get a better weapon, right? Maybe you get whatever it is that you can go and use in the game to play more. You're incentivized to do that in the game world itself. And there's story, and there's different worlds, and there's exploration, but you kind of choose where you go, right?
The idea is to replicate that experience in the learning journey, in the enterprise learning context. Is that the thing that and you kind of decouple it and go for, as you said, the low hanging fruits, because you know most of the platforms that a given company has access to already has these functionalities, starting with the leadership boards and the ranking. Narrative storytelling, I guess, is up to the instructional designer and the one who is designing the experience.
Yeah.
But that's more of a creative writing
Absolutely.
skill, I assume.
So that is a creative endeavor. You know, what are we going to build, and how's it going to entice people? But I think there's a big difference, and it's quite important, this big difference. People don't do corporate learning for fun. Why did you play World of Warcraft?
Just for the fun aspects and the adventure. So your interest and you know you wanna learn more about a given word that's out there, and I guess you know, putting that curiosity, that hunger for the unknown into the learning. I think that's what would, you know, make these two things similar to like a game experience.
If we separate them for a second, right? You played World of Warcraft for reasons. Those reasons were nothing to do with learning, right?
That's correct.
Now, if your company had said to you, we're going to onboard you, everything you need to know about this building, right? You're going to come into this building, we're going to show you where the toilets are, where the fire extinguisher is. That's one type of onboarding. If they'd said, here's a virtual world, right? There are characters in it. You can go and talk to those characters, and you'll find out where the fire extinguishers are. You'll find out where the toilets are. Would you bother? Is that something you would play for fun?
That's really right.
No, not really. So I think we need to, as an industry, we need to kind of get a reality check on stuff. And that reality check is nobody's playing corporate learning for fun. They're doing it for an outcome. And if we think about technology acceptance modeling, we have the predictors of intention. An intention is, do I intend to use this technology? Do I intend to reject it? Do I intend to continue using it? That eventually leads to the diffusion of innovation, which we call, in corporate terms, we tend to call that adoption. The predictors of that intent are usually the attributes of the technology itself. Is it useful to me? Is it going to give me something that I can use for promotions, for money, to be able to do the task that I need to do? Is it easy to use, not prohibitively difficult? Are there contextual factors, so either my social influences, and that's my leaders, my managers, my friends, my peer group, they all endorse this kind of thing and they talk about it. And this is where the idea of net promoter scores and things like that come in. And does the technology allow me to do that? So if, for example, if I'm using my phone but I have no Wi-Fi connection, then there is a physical infrastructure problem that's stopping me from using it. And then you have the consumerism benefits. So is it fun to do? Is it worth my time? Is it part of my habits? Those things are much lower on the scale of predicting intention than the core factors of, is it useful to me and can I actually use it? So to answer that question, I think we just need that little bit of reality check on. We can incorporate game-based elements into corporate learning to try and get people to have a little bit more fun or maybe incentivize them. But what we're not doing is we're not trying to rack up hours. We're not saying, well, my e-learning course over here, people were spending hours and hours in it because it was so much fun. Whereas this other one over here, they were done in 20 minutes. What does good look like? In a corporation, probably you don't want people to be spending hours in a game-based world learning some things.
It's all about the effectiveness, at least from a company's perspective, getting to the outcome, faster, and also increasing the impact and the satisfaction of the learner. But if we go back a bit, we talked about the low-hanging implementations and what you can do. What do you think are the ones that are the most impactful, but might be even harder and close to very difficult to implement, but have a huge impact on the experience? Like, if you look at it from that perspective.
So the big ticket items are going to be slightly above the concept of gamification. You have the concept of immersion. And that is if you can be, for example, psychologically immersed in a construct. So have you ever seen a good film? What's your favorite film?
My favorite is Interstellar or The Godfather. Both are like excellent movies.
1, 2, or 3?
I would say 1 is a classic. It's you cannot watch it enough times.
Absolutely. I think with slight segue, but I think with The Godfather, I think Godfather 3 gets a bad rap, but it's a pretty good film.
It's a pretty good film from today's standard, I would say. Back then, I see the critics, but the first and the second are excellent, but very different. The book is also amazing, by the way.
I haven't read the book.
Yeah,
I will have a read.
It has many additional storylines and give a huge amount of context. Yeah.
Okay, and that changes. It changes the story of the film somehow if you read the book.
It does. It also changes the appreciation towards the first film, I would say.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So for me, it's Rocky, probably the analogy.
Yeah.
But I would say with Godfather 3 and with Rocky 5, you have both. In both cases, you have a film that was critiqued heavily, and it didn't stand up to the quality of the other films. But when you watch it in isolation, it's still pretty good films. Right?
Exactly.
Now, why do I make the point about films? When you think about immersion, you think about an experience. You had an experience when you watched that film. That experience was you identified with some of the characters. You were interested in what they were doing. You felt maybe you were part of that story in some way. It made you think about, well, what would have happened if they hadn't driven to that particular stop? What would have happened if they hadn't done this particular thing? If, just to make the Godfather reference, right? If when Michael had gone to Sicily, his life had worked out okay, then the entire trajectory of his family and all of the people who were then affected by that all would have been very different.
For sure.
So you start asking these questions and you start thinking about the story.
It's all about immersion into that experience,
world.
Right? That world, yeah. But what you're saying is, it's basically that if you want to replicate it or reach some level of heights, you need really creative storytelling experience when you're designing the whole journey of a learner, of anyone who consumes your content, which sounds extremely hard to me, yet highly impactful as you highlighted. Do you think, like large language models and most recent innovations in AI can empower someone who doesn't have the skill to do it or doesn't have the right experience? Or have you seen anything like that happening? Or because to me this sounds really great, but also in the enterprise context, like, can you actually create such an immersive story? Like, as a reference, like recently I saw one of the awards, won like training content of a large enterprise. And they were like full of like given superheroes for like a given character who represents a certain skill. To me, it felt interesting. Like they really put in the effort, and it was a bit more immersive than the regular content. But yeah, I wonder what you think about this.
I have so many thoughts about what you just said. So I guess my first question would be, the superhero thing became very popular. I saw it in about 25 different places when Runway introduced their was it their next generation, not the very first iteration, but the second one. Everybody was doing it. You saw superheroes everywhere. So it very quickly lost its novelty, right? You had this initial thing where it's amazing, and then it just tailed off. And we're in that kind of novelty cycle with nearly everything that we see at the moment. Can we engender meaning with large language models? That's basically the question.
Yes.
And there were some parts of that question which I just want to pick up. Because you mentioned skill. Now, back to gaming for a second. Do you know, I might pronounce this incorrectly, Hideo Kojima?
Of course.
Yeah.
One of my favorites, like gaming directors as well.
So I think
now that's an experience, I would say.
Yeah.
Whatever Hideo does, like that's simply amazing.
Did you play Metal Gear Solid?
Of course.
Now I remember I was playing with my friend, and we were in his flat, and the PlayStation was out, and we were playing this on the PlayStation. And there's a bit, spoiling this for everybody, but if you haven't played it, go and play it. Right?
Maybe we'll cut this part out.
Well, there's a bit in that where I'll be a little bit vague, but there's a bit in that where you're fighting a particular boss who has mind control.
Exactly.
And that boss is controlling your controller. And the thing you got to do is take it out of port 1. Physically, go to the PlayStation, unplug it from port 1 and put it in port 2 to get around the mind control.
At that time, like, this kind of experience was like really unusual, like very unique. Like I still remember.
Absolutely. I've never seen that anywhere in any other game.
Exactly.
That
so
kind of, you have to be in the physical world.
A new dimensional, like, sort of experience.
But we both remember it, right?
Yeah.
Now,
so do you think it's all about these moments that you just, remember in the past, that these like wow effects or moments or?
Well, the thing I was going to say was I think it was him that said that the gaming industry has so much technology in it. And this was, when was this, 10 years ago or something like that? The gaming industry has so much technology that allows you to do great things. But the thing we're lacking is we don't have the next Hitchcock, for example, the next master of storytelling that's going to take it in a direction that really puts meaning behind it. And the reason I wanted to mention that is that when you said, can people in enterprises who don't really have much in the way of skills bridge the gap with AI? Now, we know that that's how AI works, right? Generative AI particularly, and the prevalence of large language models in web interfaces that are usable through, for example, Copilot or Gemini or ChatGPT. These, to some degree, work by bridging a skill gap in corporations. And that's why they are effective. And I always hesitate to say that we should take the path of the lowest common denominator by saying, and you see this on social media all the time, where we say, you too can do automations, no coding skill required. It's like, seriously? That's the way we're going? I want everybody to be appropriately skilled in the thing that they need to do, and therefore we get better outcomes.
Exactly.
I don't want this, like, you can do this now at the click of a button and you need no skills. It's amazing. It's not really the way to go. But with Hideo Kojima saying this thing about what we need is the next Hitchcock in the gaming industry, what we need in the learning industry is, if we are going down this road of we're going to have a meaningful learning experience, and that means something, I'll talk about that in a second. If we're going to have a meaningful learning experience, then we do need people to step up in terms of creativity. And I've seen some great things out there in the industry, but there are pockets of creativity and there are pockets of compliance And there are pockets of just churning the thing out. And there are pockets of we're just going to use the tool and click the button, and whatever comes out, we're just going to give that to our learners. And that results in a very mixed experience for learners. But I've also seen a lot of companies, some companies really do this. They engage with the learner base, figure out what they need, and they cater to that need. But a lot of the time in the industry, we don't do that. We engage with somebody else, an operations manager, a subject matter expert, somebody who will say, I want this message to go out. And that message then goes out with, I want some bells and whistles. I've seen the business partner model that we have in learning, where you've got somebody who interfaces with the business, but they're not a developer or a creator, or they don't really know anything about learning theory. They're just the person who has coffee with the right people. Now, I've seen a lot of those folks come back with, well, we want all the bells and whistles. We want voiceovers, we want shiny things, we want flashing lights, we want blah, 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 all of this, right? Fine, but now we have cognitive load problems because you're distracted by so many things that aren't giving you the core message. And all of this comes down to one point, and that is the best of creative designers will find a way to make a creative learning experience that is meaningful, that gets the point across, that doesn't distract people. Maybe it's cinematic, maybe it's a game, whatever. Go and be creative. Are we expecting that to come from people who don't have the skills and can maybe use ChatGPT to a rudimentary level? I would say at scale, you might get a slight uptick in the mean value of performance. Normal distribution, and you have a mean. I would say we're not going to get the next Hitchcock that way, though. So the meaningful experience, I would say, probably won't come from people who aren't really putting the effort in, who are using tools in a way that's not to the max.
It's very interesting. I would say, we are kind of dedicating this podcast to listeners who want to learn more about practical applications of AI and how they can sort of boost the performance of their own projects and initiatives. But if I'm a training manager or an instructional designer in a given firm, and I get really motivated by this, and I will really focus on providing a better narrative storytelling, a more creative sort of narrative around my upcoming experiences. Where would you start again? Or what kind of a process would you follow? Any sources you could, for example, recommend?
Yeah. So the first thing is, no surprise to anybody that I'm going to say this. First thing is, if you want to go do a thing, learn about that thing. Of course, if I want to learn how to be a storyteller, probably I need to understand the mechanisms of storytelling. So looking, The Hero's Journey, for example, Campbell. Read that book. Go and look at the 3-act structure and think about, setting that context and then going through a series of adverse events before you then have your conclusion at the end. Whatever it is, there will be storytelling mechanisms, and those are just 2 examples that I've given. There are multiple others. And then think about things like character development, things like when I was talking about game fiction, and I was talking about storytelling. Storytelling is based on things like characters. So you identify with a particular character. You're immersed in the world that the learning construct is about, and you might think, well, as a designer, if I'm telling a story, maybe I want to have 3 or 4 characters in there. And this is, of course, you do the Avatar piece with Colossian, and one of the things we've discussed in the past is this multiple character effect. So last year when we were talking, you had this dialogue capability,
exactly,
where you have two people that can talk to each other. But that concept of a dialogue, that concept of having multiple characters, when we start to inject storytelling into that, we then also need to think about, well, what are the different arcs that people can go on if we're telling a story? So you have do you watch Dragon Ball Z?
Of course.
So Goku, the hero, doesn't really have that much of an arc. He generally meets somebody who's stronger than him, trains a little bit, and then defeats him. And that repeats.
3-4 times minimum.
Yeah.
And then his son then the grandson, and the rest, right?
And it just keeps going. And
Yeah.
it's kind of okay if you have a protagonist like that, because the protagonist isn't really the story. Now, Vegeta, the Prince of All Saiyans, has a redemption arc. That's very different, and it's so much more interesting.
It's more mature. Yeah.
It is. It's more mature. We can relate to it as adults. It means something, because most people have gone through some kind of adversity. Most people have a mixture of good and bad. They're not the purity of Goku. Most people have some things that they feel. And it's good to see a character and identify with a character that goes through a redemption arc. But what that means automatically, just by giving that example, what that means is that there are arcs that your characters can go through when you're thinking about storytelling. So the point I'm making is, if you want to be a good storyteller, you need to know something about the mechanisms of storytelling. It doesn't just happen. And that then brings me to, how do you use, I'm going to say the term ChatGPT, because most people have access to it. You might be using Copilot in your enterprise. You might be using Gemini. You might be using Google Workspaces, whatever it happens to be. The mechanisms broadly are the same, even if every model does something ever so slightly different or has different performance attributes. So the tangible things are going to be, how do you work back and forth with any particular model, such as ChatGPT, to try and get the outputs that you want? And we could talk about prompting structure. I'm not going to do that today, because people need to go and use the tools. But once you've learned the mechanisms of storytelling, then you would need to put those kinds of things into your creative process when you're going back and forth with the model to say, well, I want to create a persona of a character. I want this character to go through a particular arc. I want to use the hero's journey with this particular protagonist. Maybe and it could be very, very simple. Have you seen Rick and Morty?
That I haven't.
Right. So, or Community, which are both Dan Harmon creations.
No, not really.
So
But
Dan Harmon
what's it about?
so they're both about things, and I think Rick and Morty is,
Yeah.
the first 2 seasons are very good examples of what I'm about to say. But Dan Harmon took the hero's journey and made a version for TV. So the idea with the hero's journey is, it's an epic. So you have a normal world, you have then some kind of call to action where the hero goes out of their normal world, and then they go through a series of events, come to a realization that wasn't the real thing, and then eventually they go and do the real thing. So Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones, etc. They'll go through this same kind of structure. And what Dan Harmon was doing was saying, well, that's great for a big epic. 3 films, Lord of the Rings, amazing, works. But what if I'm in the medium of TV and I'm telling a 22-minute episode where, like The Simpsons, where by the end of the episode, nothing should have changed, because the next episode needs to be watched separately.
Exactly. You have to start from there.
So he came up with a version of that model that can be used for a 22-minute episode.
Interesting. What you're saying, could it be applied in the sort of workplace context, that you have different skills, you have different sort of I would say courses you have to do, but you always have to kind of return to the same position that you start from, because it's not necessarily sequential, but it's a sandbox learning environment possibly, which also reinforces the gamification aspect.
Yeah, potentially. So there's one episode which is amazing. It's one of my favorite episodes, but there's a Rick and Morty episode where
I promise I will watch it.
You should watch this, right? The opening sequence, I'll only give you the opening sequence, like the bit before the credit, like the cold open of this thing. The opening sequence is, the car battery is dead. And and the car battery itself is like a sci-fi world. They need to go into the battery and fix it. The rest of the episode is the adventure that they have. The reason that's such a good episode is, in the hero's journey, you have this setting of context first. It's the very first point. Because in the hero's journey, you want us to say, well, the hero is living his normal life. It's kind of boring. He's got kind of drivers that he, ambitions, hopes and dreams, but he's not really fulfilled in his life. And when the thing happens that is the call to action, it's a stimulation outside of his normal context. in this particular episode, they do that whole thing, that entire bit, they do it in about 30 seconds max. It might even be less. So, and that's because of this TV model, TV version of the hero's journey. The reason that's so important, as you've just said, can we apply that in a corporate context if we want to tell a story? Probably we can, but we need to learn about those things. We need to expose ourselves to media, and we need to see those things in action to get inspiration.
Some of these are such default things that you just consume media indeed, but you won't start thinking about it yet. Just listening to you and hearing your insights, it's indeed such a clever mechanism, right? In comparison to the like the typical trilogies and longer TV series. But when these stories are kind of irrelevant to each other, I think that's particularly interesting. And I really think the takeaway here is that kind of like focusing on this storytelling, focusing on the creative aspects of creating a learning experience, creating a training content. Are there any types of training or any domains that you think are better suited to this, or maybe are less suited, or do you think this could be applied to, almost everywhere?
So I generally think a lot of these things are applicable to everything. I would say that certain mechanisms are more accepted in certain industries. So if we think about, for example, military or aviation or medical or dental, simulation is very widely accepted as a means of gaining skill. Injecting game-based mechanics into a simulation is therefore not much, it's not a big lift, right? Because you're just thinking ever so slightly differently about your design. But the idea of making a simulation and then having it adopted by the workforce or the students or whatever it is that whole thing is already there. In heavily regulated spaces, we of course have the pushback of, well, safety, for example, is a heavily regulated thing in some industries. It should be in all industries, of course, but in some of the industries, it's the impact is greater. And you have this pushback where, well, safety is not a game, so we're not going to put any gamification into safety training, which is a little bit of a miss, right? Because you have the option for people to, if you think about immersive learning, you have the option for people to learn in a safe environment, to test things out, to get things wrong. And you also have the opportunity to increase cognitive, behavioral, and motivational outcomes by using game-based mechanics. So because you have both of those things, why would you not want to get the maximum efficacy from your learning experience? And on the flip side, no, we don't want to use games because safety isn't a game, is one example of things that people say. But it's one of those things where we think, back to what I said about skills and knowledge, if you don't know enough about the thing you're trying to do, then it's going to be prohibitive. So I would say we need to think slightly differently about the regulated space. But industries that are well known for simulation and adopt that well probably have the easiest lift.
And that's clear. And indeed, I personally see when I talk to our customers, like much friction in specific domains about implementing these strategies. But talking about this whole domain and gamification, indeed, like I believe this literally could be applied almost everywhere. But kind of like listening to what you've been saying, like, is immersive learning and kind of immersion strongly correlated with gamification, or kind of what's your opinion on the two topics, or how correlated are they? Or if I'm aiming for an immersive experience, am I gonna get the benefits kind of gamification?
So I would say the link for me, and it's not explicit in the literature, but the link would be that a gamification mechanic in the gamification taxonomy that I've referenced is in-game fiction, so narrative structure and storytelling. It's also referenced in the meta-analysis that I was talking about as something that is a potential moderator for some of the outcomes that we see. And the point on immersion, psychological immersion, is that you can be psychologically immersed in good narrative structure and storytelling. So there's a thread that goes through the 3 bits of literature that makes me think that if you want somebody to be immersed, they're never going to be immersed without the concept of good game structure or fiction. So that's the thread where I think, we should be thinking about all of these things together. I just want to make the point that when we talk about immersion, I'm talking about psychological immersion, which could happen when you read a book. It can happen when you watch a film. It can happen when you watch a cartoon, that you're immersed, you're invested, you're part of that construct. It's different for folks who talk about immersive learning, and what they mean is, I'm going to put a headset on. That's not the same thing. And we need to treat those constructs differently as well, because those constructs do have problems when it comes to, I think motion sickness is solved by the latest Unreal engine, for example, latency and blur and things like that. But we also have the physical attributes. You need a space, you need a headset, you probably need a laptop somewhere. You might need a facilitator to make sure you don't bump into things. So
because what I see, so many like solution providers and kind of solution pitch themselves as an immersive solution, but what they really kind of bring to the table is kind of the hardware aspect, or more like the audio visual. But to me, what's really the takeaway here is the storytelling elements and the kind of immersion into the world of the content that way, not necessarily through kind of hardware or like even like audio visual experience, but that is the key. Indeed,
absolutely. And the other point you made about scalability. So we made 2 points that were either side of this kind of middle point. So one point was, can people without the necessary skills use generative AI to do some of these things? And on the other side was the importance of creative structure and storytelling and knowing, the hero's journey and all of this stuff. There's a bit in the middle where if you have a good story and you have the skills in your team to be able to use generative AI, you can increase something like immersion, because quantity has a quality of its own. Now, what I mean by that is, have you played? Yeah, I mean, you played Warcraft, right?
Yeah, of course.
So these massively multiplayer, whatever it stands for, MMO RPG.
Yes.
Yeah. I tend to play RPGs, single player, right? Final Fantasy, that kind of thing. And I have given this example many times before on other podcasts, but Final Fantasy 16. I played that. Did you play it?
I haven't played any Final Fantasy games, unfortunately.
Oh, they're amazing, right? Final Fantasy 10, best game ever made. I'm absolutely going to die on that hill, I tell you.
I think there's a big competition with the Metal Gear Solid series, so it's a different experience.
It's a different
hard
experience.
to compare.
The story from Metal Gear Solid.
That's a true hero story, in my opinion. Like really complex, but
it's very
like,
complex. Yeah.
It's like a masterpiece from that.
The first one, yes. The second one was very difficult to follow. But
the third one was easier to follow.
The third one was easier, yeah.
But also very good.
The Final Fantasy X, the story moved me just like it moved a lot of other people. Right?
Really?
It's a very moving story. But the thing is, with old school RPGs, you're invested. You're invested because you spent thousands of hours grinding, maybe not thousands, hundreds of hours in the game grinding to level up, right? And you're invested in those characters. Final Fantasy VII moved a lot of people as well. That was very controversial at the time, 20-something years ago, almost 30 years ago. Wow. Anyway, Final Fantasy 16 gave me this inspiration, and I've said this a couple of times in the past on other podcasts, and that is that very first time I saw the old school RPGs where you effectively on a 2D map, you click on this character, you get some text, click on another character, you get some text. Eventually, you piece together the story, you piece together what it is that you're going to do, and then you go and do it. And that's basically the mechanism. 16, very different. 3D world, highly rendered. 15, I think, was better, but it was the same kind of concept. That you have this world that's rendering around you, and it's very photorealistic. But there are lots of characters in there. Now, at that time, they made the dialogue for every character, every persona, every village you walk into, every bit of dialogue, every voice that you hear, every text that comes up on the chat on the side was made by people. Now, those people have the skills to create stories, have the skills for world building, and now they have in their pockets, they have generative AI helping them to do this at scale. So now we have a situation where the rendering of a 3D world, the creation of a 3D world, every blade of grass, every persona that's in every village, every line of dialogue that aligns to a story can be done at scale and can be done quickly.
So powerful. And they're unique and also kind of correlate with each other. And
Yes.
it's fascinating. Like,
so the question, though, is then we have that capability. What you were saying about an enterprise learning experience, what used to take, I saw a post on this yesterday on LinkedIn. What was the guy's name? I've forgotten. JR. And the post was about being an order taker, creating some e-learning, taking 12 weeks to make some a little bit of e-learning and then putting out some content versus YouTubers who basically maybe do something like this and then next week it's published, right? Or maybe it takes 2 or 3 hours, or maybe it doesn't take any time at all. Maybe you just do it live and then post it. And you have this cycle of content where if you're not really constrained by anything, you can make whatever you want. And in the corporate world, you say, well, it's going to take me 12 weeks, 3 months, 4 months, however long it is, to make this one bit of basically shoddy content. And why would we do that? Now, in the modern world, we say generative AI, with those people with those skills, allows them to do this in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Great. It's still not that interesting. What I've just said about the game world, the powerful tools that we have, the ability to make 3D environments, the ability to tell stories, the ability to have rich in-world experiences that are fleshed out by lots of people, and you can go and talk to all of these characters and you get a sense of almost community or social influence as well. Why wouldn't we do that in 4 months instead of just saying we're going to make that same e-learning course and make it quicker? Why don't we still take the 4 months, but make something like that? That's a philosophy I'm not really seeing out in the market at the moment because the focus is cost. The focus is, can we drive the cost base down? Not can we drive the experience up? So your point about the learning experience is, I think there's a barrier, and the barrier is cost.
thanks for all this so far. I prepared some talk questions I would want to ask. So just let's do a quick fire round. I would say, what was the sort of most impactful work that you've done so far in the industry that kind of, made the largest impact? Like, not necessarily related to the topics we discussed, but could be the mentioned example in the beginning. But which was the one where you felt like, this had like this worked really well and had the largest impact on the learners?
That's a good question. I think the example that I gave in Africa, so I eventually ended up working with a sort of Pan-African group where we were trying to do the same thing in different countries. That was impactful for reasons that maybe aren't that much to do with learning, but are to do with the idea that what we did was we put digital learning in the hands of people who previously were never using digital learning. And that included things like IT skills. Now, one of the tangential, the byproduct of this kind of approach was that we were looking towards doing things like field data capture with the same workforce. So that is, when you go out to communities, you capture data on tablets and it syncs to the cloud. That was never possible because the workforce themselves didn't have devices and they didn't have connectivity and they didn't have the skills to use those devices. So we had business and operational outcomes that were impactful in how that field force interacts with communities. That field force themselves, they were interacting with communities to promote health benefits, to make sure that those communities stayed healthy and they had access to the best research and all of this stuff. So the impact that went from not only making sure that our field force were well versed, well trained, and had digital skills that allowed them to have impacts in their communities. And one of the things at the time I was saying was that that area, sub-Saharan Africa, had at the time, statistics will be different now, I'm sure, had something like 25% of the global disease burden, but something like 1% of the global healthcare population. That's a massive disparity, and we were trying to address that. So back then, I would say the largest impact was probably that. There are a couple of other projects which have been very impactful on smaller populations. So you would say, for example, I'm in this particular company, we do this project, it affects these workers, they have this impact. But it's then difficult to make that link between what those people do and their effect on society. So I would go back to that example.
It's a fascinating example. Thank you so much. Next question is, every enterprise, I would say, project hits certain friction. Can you talk about the time when things didn't go as planned, and what's your largest learning from a mistake that kind of happened in a sort of either creating or deploying a learning experience?
So I don't make mistakes. No, I'm kidding. But there was one, I was working in one company, and when I joined, there was a project that had already had 6 months of stakeholder disruption. So they had asked for one thing, they had not gotten that thing, they were going around in circles. And I dropped in, I was there for 1 week, pretty much, and this landed on my plate. I was like, okay, I'll deal with it. Fine. Now, the thing that was happening there was, and it's always the same thing, nearly always, it's the same problem. I've done more than 250 deployments. So, yes, it's always the same thing. It is a miscommunication between people. It's not the tech. It's not even infrastructure. It's just people not being able to communicate with each other. So person A wanted something from the learning department. Learning department thought that they wanted something else. Nobody could be clear.
Yeah.
And it's terrible, particularly terrible, when you have learning departments who are order takers and stakeholders can't articulate what they want. Now, usually they can't articulate what they want because they aren't familiar with the language that the learning departments will understand. So I've seen this so many times where somebody says, I want this to look sexy. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that useless bit of information. What does that actually mean? What does sexy mean to you? We need to get into that, right? Or I want this to look impactful, amazing again, right? Let's dig into the words and figure out what that actually means.
Right.
Because you can't develop something with that kind of specification. You'll know this, right? Someone says that. What do? You got to tease into it, right?
Yeah.
And in this kind of project, the reason it had gone wrong, because nobody had done that. Somebody had said, I want it to look swish. I want it to look modern. I want it to look amazing, right? And the developers had just gone off and gone, fine, I get what that is. I'm just going to make that.
Yeah.
Gave it back to the stakeholder. They were like, no, this isn't what I wanted. I wanted something slightly different. Fine, we'll make something slightly different. Go back again. That's not what I had in mind. Go back again. So it just became this sort of comedy of errors when it came to communication. And of course, when I joined the project, I just said immediately, well, okay, let's tease into exactly what everything means, build a specification, and then make something to that specification. And if we can't agree scope, then we just kill the project.
Yeah.
So that's it.
And this brings me to my next one, which is somewhat related, but what do you believe that most around you disbelieve?
Say it again. What do I believe?
What do you believe that most around you disbelieve?
I believe, this is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway. I believe that most people think that they have more skill than they do. And everybody has an inflated sense of themselves, of course. But you're familiar with the Dunning-Kruger curve?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that the noisiest people I've worked with have been the people who know the least.
Mm.
And these will be people who will stand up on this table right here and look me in the eye and tell me that, you know what, generative AI doesn't do what we need it to do. We need human intervention. We have to have a human in the loop. It only gives me 10% of what I want. And, you know, I would look at the baby throwing a tantrum, jumping up and down on the table and say, well, do you know how to use it? The answer is nearly always no.
Yeah.
You know, I've had people look me in the eye and tell me this. I asked ChatGPT to give me a course outline on this. And it didn't build me a whole curriculum. It didn't build me a whole course. It didn't give me video scripts. I had to do all of that myself. Well, what did you put in? I asked it to build me a course on this. Well, did you expect? How do you ask a question, right? Now, those people, I don't know, because I don't interact with with a lot of people who will have this conversation when we're face to face. But how do you ask a question? How do you ask a question of Google? How do you ask a question of your child? How do you ask a question of your friends? You and I sitting here eye to eye, how do we ask each other questions? Probably we don't say, go build me a course on this and I want it to look sexy and I'm going to get exactly what I want. There would be other things, other words I would have to use, other ways I would need to communicate.
It's over communication most of the time that must be done, so
yeah.
It's very important.
And I read a book by Edward Hall. I don't know if you know Edward Hall. He's
No.
a cross-cultural researcher. So he looks at, so there are a number of researchers in the space, so Schwartz, Hall, Hofstadter as well, and they look at how different cultures actually differ. So qualitatively, you have things like norms, right? Things that people do, the buildings that one would see on the streets of a different country. But quantitatively, you can start to measure things and you can build sort of multi-axis models where you say, well, we know on these particular axes that there is a difference between this country and this country over here. And what Hall was looking at was the difference of communication. So you have high and low context communication cultures. So Japanese, Chinese languages, for example, there's a lot of context. So the same word can mean 17 different things depending on the context in which you use that word. English, slightly lower context. Machine language, there's no context at all.
Yeah.
Now, in all of those cases, I don't know, I don't have any children around me, generally speaking. I don't have children myself. My sister has a couple of kids. If I'm talking to a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old, I would need to use different words. I would need to be explaining things in a slightly different way. If I'm talking to a machine or typing into a console, which the machine then takes my instruction from, I would need to use slightly different words. If I'm asking a person, I would need to some degree, explain some of the context. And the difficulty I'm trying to express here is that if you have a population, a worker population, whether that's in the learning team, whether that's in the safety team, whether it's generally the population, who are unfamiliar with how to ask a question, the detail that is required to get the outcome that they want, they're going to fail with machines and they're going to have, to some degree, a poor experience, and then they're going to feel that it's the machine's fault.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that it is. So that's the difference. That's what I believe that other people don't.
Yeah. It's very clear, and it's a typical issue that it's very recognizable in the space. Maybe a final question: Who would you recommend following in the space? Who are the most inspirational figures for you, from who you get information, insights?
That's a really interesting question, and it is a question I get a lot. So first of all, follow me on all of my platforms because I'm amazing.
Follow Ash.
The second thing, slightly darker thing to say is I always depersonalize information from the person. So I don't follow particular people. I tend to survey the literature, and I tend to try and find things that are interesting in terms of topics. So I want to read about artificial intelligence. It doesn't really matter who's saying it. What matters is what's being said. So I tend not to follow people. But there are a lot of people on different social media platforms who have an opinion. Follow them if you wish, everybody. Follow them if you wish. I would say the thing you need to be discerning about is this a person that knows what they're talking about and has a valuable opinion? Or is this a person that has a loud opinion because they are on the other end of the Dunning-Kruger curve? And it's unfortunate that there are a lot of loud people who are on the left of that curve.
Absolutely. It's very, very insightful. Thank you so much, Ash. This was the final question, so really appreciate you, coming here today. We are going to create your avatar as well, so this is going to be the sort of very first podcast where avatars can actually talk to one another. And I hope it's going to basically resemble the real experience as much as possible.
I'm very interested to see what the avatar looks like and how it works.
Exactly.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. Much appreciated. Thanks, Ash. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Or if you're listening to this on Spotify, don't forget to follow.